This podcast contains information and details relating to suicide. We urge anyone struggling with their emotions to contact Lifeline on 13 11 14, 13 11 14, or visit them at lifeline.org.au. A 24-year-old devoted mother of two, fleeing a violent relationship.
Says my mum, I'll see you soon.
Bags packed. Car running. Her daughters strapped into the back seat.
Mum told me that she needed to go back inside to grab something.
Panic.
Amy's dead, sir. Well, Amy's dead, eh?
Confusion.
Well, about 5 minutes they said, no, it's a suicide.
100% this is a murder scene.
What do you think is really the honest truth about Amy?
The truth about Amy.
Until we meet again.
In season 1 of The Truth About Amy, we brought you the case of a young mum attempting to flee a violent relationship, whose sudden death was quickly ruled a suicide. Authorities failed to consider the possibility of murder, maintaining there wasn't enough evidence of domestic violence. But now, as we know, they just weren't looking hard enough. We have photos.
Erin, I've got a photograph that I believe Amy sent this to you via text.
That is it. See, I got told that they didn't find this.
The police didn't find it.
Yeah.
Well, we did.
First-hand accounts from friends who witnessed the violence, even while Amy was 9 months pregnant.
All I saw was David with his hands around Amy's neck.
We've uncovered fresh evidence thanks to our listeners.
And he goes, yeah, she was dead. We'd been pigging and we found her. And then we had to burn the clothes.
No one talks about their plans for the rest of the week and the next day to then go and do that.
Internationally renowned crime scene expert Scott Broder weighs in.
So the left hand can't pull the trigger, the right hand can't pull the trigger, and as an investigator, Liam, it's becoming pretty obvious she didn't pull the trigger.
He's now the third independent expert to conclude that Amy could not have killed herself, as well as the officers first on scene.
This is just not a suicide.
But both your colleagues agreed with you.
Yes. Oh, yeah, 100%. And to this day.
Now WA Police has reopened the investigation, and the Director of Public Prosecutions will decide whether there's enough evidence to proceed.
This has to go to trial. There's enough evidence to prove that someone killed Amy. The truth must come out.
I'm Liam Bartlett.
And I'm Alison Sandy.
And welcome to Season 2 of The Truth About Amy. Welcome back, Al.
G'day, Liam. It's a pleasure to be back.
It's nice to have you. Nice to have you. Nice to have our podcast back, and hopefully, as we've been saying all last year, most of last year, to get a result. That's what we're here for.
That's right.
We're also not getting any younger, so I'm going to have to put my glasses on. So much has happened, hasn't it, since our last episode?
It really has. I mean, well, you were here for it, weren't you? The election?
The WA election, yeah. Premier Roger Cook, now in his own right, romped it in with a resounding victory in that election, and is now, as they say, out of Mark McGowan's shadows, so he'll be very happy.
Accompanied by his wife Carly and adult children, Labor has a new hero.
Good evening, friends.
David Simmons finally fronted the court. Although it seems like he had to be in prison for that to occur. He didn't actually turn up.
That was amazing, wasn't it? We'll talk more about that in just a moment. The other thing that's happened, of course, with Premier Cook now running a new cabinet, announcing a new lineup, is that there is a new police minister.
Yes.
But anyway, we'll talk more about that too. But perhaps the most significant story of the year so far happened in February, when WA's top cop, Col Blanche, the commissioner, admitted, Al, that his police force had well and truly, to use the vernacular, stuffed up the handling of the Mark Bombara case.
Yeah, a bit of a change in tune from when he was asked about it at the start, but let's have a listen to that.
The Commissioner has admitted the WA Police Force failed in the weeks before Jennifer and Gretel Patelchas were murdered in their Floriat home last May. Cole Blanche spoke today alongside the gunman's daughter, Ariel Bombara. The bombshell report into the killings found 8 officers failed to effectively perform their duties. James Carmody has more.
So, Al, before we continue, it's worth noting the significance of the Bombara story and what we've learned from it. Now, we already knew Amy's case and the way it was treated by authorities. We knew that wasn't an anomaly, but examining just how and why Mark Bombara was able to do what he did is, I think, pretty critical in understanding the current cop culture here in the West and the level of integrity of those at the top. Now, Amy's family is still fearful, and not without reason, I think, fair to say. The focus of WA Police in reinvestigating Amy's death is more about being seen to do the right thing rather than actually doing it.
Yeah, we're at a critical juncture with Amy's case. Rightly so, it's being re-examined by WA Police. So now our listeners who are very vocal on social media, if you're not already, please follow us on Facebook and Instagram, will undoubtedly all agree their cynicism is not unreasonable.
No, I don't think it's unreasonable either, which brings us back to the Bombara tragedy, and the way it unfolded has been well and truly laid out in this new report. And for the very first time, we're able to see the issues at the centre of modern-day policing playing out, almost as if in slow motion, which gives us a sort of post-mortem on WA Police detailing every aspect that tragically went wrong. Now, to be devil's advocate for a moment, the issues being experienced by police in Western Australia are not dissimilar to those from other states. And we've said this before. Handling DV-related cases, domestic violence-related cases, is not easy for any police force in any part of not just Australia or Australia's jurisdictions, but the entire world. It's a very difficult thing. But the difference here, I think, in WA, as it seems, is the force's appetite for change and to get better and to actually reform so that these things have a much lower chance of happening again. It's much more reticent, I think, in Western Australia than that of their counterparts in New South Wales and also in Queensland, which we've seen some substantial changes for the better. But thanks to a very, very brave lady, and I think that's probably an understatement, but the very vocal Ariel Bombara, we know that her father, Mark, was a time bomb waiting to go off. And when that happened, he made sure that he caused maximum damage. Now, it's not to say that his actions were premeditated, so let's not get that confused. He was just completely unhinged. And as Ariel had warned, any degree of disappointment or distress could set him off. And that's exactly what happened. And as we now know, death and destruction lay in his wake. Now, there was no chance of justice. All that was left to do was to pick up the pieces, microanalyse everything that happened, and put in whatever safeguards possible to prevent it from happening again. So a complete investigation was inevitable. And ultimately, there'd be no hiding the fact that those responsible, whose core responsibility was to protect the community, remember, that's what police officers are sworn to do, right? That's the difference. Because we talk about duty of care in lots of different workplaces, don't we, these days? It's a bit of a key phrase. But for the police, it's the ultimate. They are sworn under oath to protect. And in this case, they utterly and completely failed. That's not going too far. But before I get too worked up, let's return to James Carmody from the 7 Perth newsroom, who covered the investigation report's release on the day.
This report makes a series of important findings and recommendations about how WA Police deal with the victims of family and domestic violence, and how police let down Ariel Bombara and her mother when they came to officers and warned them that Mark Bombara was dangerous and armed just weeks before he shot dead his wife's friend and her daughter in Floriat, Jennifer and Gretel Patelchas. Here's what Ariel Bombara had to say about her dealings with officers.
We told you that he was going to murder us. So did you not believe us? Or did you just not give a shit? I can have empathy for human beings making mistakes, but that is a lot of human beings making a lot of mistakes.
The report details that 15 officers in total had direct dealings with Ariel Bombara and her mother, and more than half of them, 8 officers, failed in performing their duties to varied levels of seriousness. None were sacked, but they have all received internal disciplinary action, the details of which have not been made public. Commissioner Cole Blanche says he's confident his officers do care, but they failed, and were also failed themselves by a system that isn't working. Failures that let the Bombara family down from the time Ariel and her mother first walked into Mirrabooka Police Station and told officers they feared Mark Bombara would use his licensed firearms to murder them.
And she said if Mum and I came in screaming and bleeding, it would have been a very different outcome. I've got to agree with that. That's why we've got our risk assessment wrong, because 2 composed professional people came in and said the same thing, and we didn't see it. We got it wrong, but I own that system, and it's my job to fix it, and my job is to support our officers so we never do it again.
The report makes 18 recommendations. 11 are complete, 7 are still in progress.
Just a bit of background here. Bombara was licensed to own 13 guns.
13?
13.
He was licensed for 13?
Yes, he was.
Unbelievable.
The Cook government has since passed new firearm laws restricting licence holders to between 5 and 10 firearms, as well as the requirement for mental health checks and mandatory safety training. Other recommendations include the immediate removal of a person's firearms when a report of family or domestic violence has been made against them, and the introduction of a family violence coordinator to be present at the WA Police State Operations Command Centre at all times to allow officers to seek expert advice. So what's the significance of this in the context of Amy? Well, as you know, Amy's case was also mishandled by police officers, and this has been accepted and acknowledged by WA Police. But there's a new twist to our investigation, something admittedly we suspected but now have proof. In order to show you, though, we have to provide some context and explore the handling of other cases so that you can see how it works in Western Australia and indeed in many other police jurisdictions. In Season 1, we touched upon the brotherhood and the pressure put on officers to conform. But at the time, we didn't really understand all the inner machinations and internal politics. Much of this season will reveal what it's like to be a police officer in the Wild West. But before we go into all that, let's lay the foundation. Here's Commissioner Cole Blanche again. This time, though, he's talking less than a week after the tragedy.
The information that the police had on the night, I believe that was around the 28th of March, the circumstances would not have met the threshold of a 72-hour police order. There was a family violence incident report submitted. So it did, I know there are suggestions that we did not act. We did act.
Now, we all know hindsight is 20/20, but there really seems to be a stark difference between what Cole Blanche said a week after the incident to what he said almost a year later after the report. What do you think, Liam?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you asked that, Al. I mean, this is a constant, isn't it? This is all about sort of stand and deliver, stand and rebut, defend, no matter what. So as soon as something happens, no matter what you think or believe or any of the potential scenarios, just get up there and say we didn't do anything wrong. Nothing happened. This is part of the culture that we're talking about. And then obviously after an investigation that's done by an independent body, then you can't stand up and say the same thing, can you? You have to respond to what the conclusions are. And obviously Cole Blanche has been caught in that classic pincer where he has to then say, okay, well, we got it wrong. Now we apologise. Now we say we're going to reform. Let's go through exactly what happened. So here's 2 level-headed, articulate, smart, distressed women telling police on several occasions that a dangerous, gun-wielding, violent man with deteriorating mental health issues is going to kill them. Not only that, on top of that, they are related to him. One is the wife, and the other one is the daughter. So that, to me, that makes even more impact on what they're saying. That plea for help doesn't even warrant a 72-hour protection order. Now, just let's put it another way. An angry, cruel, vicious, abusive, mentally sick and irrational man remains free and in possession of a loaded gun. And as you've just pointed out, Al, he had no less than 13 registered firearms, so the police can dial that up on a computer at any moment, any instant, in any police station around Western Australia. So they know exactly what they're dealing with, right? They know how many guns he's got. This bloke is still permitted, and this is not overstating it, to threaten the lives of his family, because his family is telling the police that he's threatening them, and nothing is done about it. So even before an investigation, you've got to be thinking, hang on, there's something wrong here, isn't there? There's got to be something wrong with that process. But the Commissioner of WA Police says, no, they took appropriate action. That's what he said. Oh, and this is even with the rear view mirror having been cleaned, because at that stage, when he said that, remember, 2 people were dead. So he then goes on to defend his officer's actions or inaction, saying an internal investigation is underway as this, some sort of acquiescence on his part. Like that's sort of something from 1968. Oh, don't worry. Internals are looking after it. It'll be fine, because that's meant to make you feel better. Then 6 months later, the Commissioner again fronts the media following the conclusion of the investigation, which is undertaken by WA Police but overseen by the CCC, by the State Coroner and the Ombudsman, acknowledging, as we've just discussed, Al, yes, mistakes were made. And this is after the investigation report states very, very clearly and concisely, WA Police is completely to blame, and 18 new recommendations will be introduced to minimise the risk of this ever happening again. I mean, does he have any other choice but to cop it on the chin? Clearly not.
Nope.
Clearly not. And that's what worries me. So, does what's right, does that have to be completely spelled out to WA Police before they do the right thing? That's the very simple question. It sounds like something out of an episode of The Simpsons, but it's pretty obvious. I have a copy of the internal investigation report, not the full one, that wasn't released publicly, but the sanitised one given to the media, and that's bad enough. And it starts with a summary of WA Police's contact with Ariel Bombara and her mother, Rowena, including their initial attendance at Mirrabooka Police Station, then a telephone call from Ariel to Perth Police Station while she was still at Mirrabooka Police Station, a subsequent telephone call from Ariel to the Perth Family Violence Team, then the triage process by the Fremantle Family Violence Team, then the police attendance at the Bombara family home to allow Ariel and her mum to retrieve personal items, and finally, last but not least, the inability of support services to contact the Bombara family to provide follow-up support. So literally, if you go around the Monopoly board, it's from start to go. The report states that WA Police was warned on multiple occasions about the risk posed by Mark Bombara, and those warnings were legitimate. That's what the report says, Al. That's not me. I'll say that again. Those warnings were legitimate. That's what the report says. So I think what they're saying here is that what they were told at the time, as opposed to what they know now, was enough. It was enough to meet the threshold of the 72-hour police order. And it goes on to say WA Police was aware that, and I'll give you these in headline form again, Ariel's parents had recently split. WA Police knew that. WA Police also knew Ariel and her mum feared Mark Bombara's mental state was deteriorating, partly due to a recent minor stroke, and he was capable of murdering them.
That's a big one, isn't it?
WA Police also was aware that they had a long history of abusive, controlling and coercive behaviour which was escalating. They were also aware that as well as access to licensed firearms and a history of not securing them properly, that was all on the record. And WA Police was also aware that they were concerned that one of his guns could not be accounted for. How many more red flags do you need? So, the report concluded, have a listen to this.
WA Police attended approximately 60,000 family and domestic violence-related matters in 2024, often involving dangerous and complex circumstances. Whilst officers endeavour to make the best decision every time, the consequences of wrong decisions can be catastrophic. Police systems, policies and procedures must provide clarity to officers so they can make the best decision in every circumstance. WA Police have completed 11 of the recommendations and are progressing well with the remaining 7. Repeat offenders who cannot demonstrate a change in their behaviour have no place in our community, and police will always recommend to the courts that they remain in prison.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here.
Now, just so you're getting the full picture here, we've included almost everything that Commissioner Blanche had to say at that media conference on the 1st of February.
Sadly, we estimate only 20% of victims of domestic violence report those incidents to police. 80% of those in a violent relationship are often living in silence.
So, going back to the statistics cited in the report, WA Police attended 60,000 DV incidents.
That figure is incredible, Liam. So dividing that by the number of days in a year, it equates to police attending about 165 a day. But that's just the ones we know about. It's just, if that's just 20% of the totality, we're actually looking at 820 domestic violence incidents every single day. That's 300,000 a year. Astonishing.
That's incredible, isn't it? It is incredible. And it really puts into context, I think, Al, the extent of Australia's domestic violence problem when you look at these figures. And remember, these figures are just for one state. So it begs the question too, if you're a police officer looking into one of these 165 incidents that happen every day, how do you choose which one should take priority?
According to the Commissioner, it's those considered to be the highest risk. But who makes that determination?
Well, precisely. And of course, we weren't at the press conference. We haven't had much luck getting on Col Blanche's mailing list for obvious reasons. But this is what the Police Commissioner told journalists who were there.
The finding is that officers did not correctly assess the risk. Therefore, the available powers under the Restraining Orders Act and the Firearms Act were not exercised appropriately. A correct risk assessment would have provided sufficient grounds to issue a police order to Mark Bombara, and that power would have then extended to seizing lawful firearms. The second key finding from the investigation is that insufficient action was taken by police to explore whether Mark Bombara was a fit and proper person to hold a firearms licence based on medical grounds, despite police being told of his deteriorating medical condition by the family. And the third and final key finding is that insufficient action was taken by police to identify and investigate alleged firearm offences, which included a report of an unsecure firearm. That investigation then took the entire organisation, including myself, to look for recommendations on how we can ensure that this never happens again.
So my reading of this is upon receiving a family violence complaint, if the alleged perpetrator has firearms, they will automatically be seized regardless of the risk assessment made by the police officer who is recording the details. But police still get to use their own discretion to determine other aspects, such as whether to consult the new family violence coordinator. It's also worth noting that even though WA Police recognised the error of detectives calling off forensics in Amy's case, that choice remains discretionary. I contacted WA Police to verify and was told in the event of a sudden death, officers on site will determine the cause and circumstances. However, if it's an obvious murder, whatever that is, forensics will attend. Following Amy's death, new regulations relating to firearm-related deaths were introduced, ensuring officers consulted with homicide, who along with uniformed police and district detectives would make a decision as to whether forensics were required. But a forensics team still doesn't automatically attend a scene in the event of an unexpected sudden death involving a firearm.
like Amy's. Ariel Bombara remains sceptical and intensely critical of WA Police despite the concessions made.
For women in domestic violence relationships, the most dangerous time for them is when they decide to leave and the weeks and months that follow. Often they've chosen to stay longer than they wanted to for this exact fear of the danger, and are finally leaving because the danger of staying outweighs the danger of leaving. But after receiving countless messages from women sharing their own stories of police not taking them seriously, resulting in real, violent consequences for these women and children, I'm not at all surprised that no action was taken against my father. I think this was the perfect storm of apathy and compassion fatigue from officers, combined with shoddy systems, outdated policies and insufficient training and support that resulted in a lethal outcome. Jenny and Gretel Patelchis should not have been murdered. They should not have had to die in order for the police to start taking domestic violence seriously, but here we are. The sad reality is that had my father come to the correct location and murdered my mum and me, we would have become just another domestic violence statistic that disappears with little further investigation. So whilst I'm torn because I want to shout and swear on behalf of all the women who were murdered and the people who were left behind to deal with the devastating aftermath, I know that won't change anything. So I want to say that I truly appreciate the work that has gone into this investigation. I appreciate that you listened to me. Well, I didn't give you much of a choice, but you listened and you allowed me to have input into this process, and I am truly grateful and I am supportive of the recommendations that have come out of this report. And I appreciate that you will continue to keep the door open to me, because whilst this report focused largely on the guns due to the specific circumstances of the case, we know that this isn't a gun issue, it's a domestic violence issue. And we know that most domestic violence homicides don't involve guns. Women get stabbed, choked, burnt to death. So what I want to see as a next step is how WA Police can learn from our case and apply it across the board, because every woman and child deserves equal protection, and the system shouldn't be set up to rely on victim survivors raising these issues.
I asked WA Police about the apology to the Bombara and Patelchis families, in particular the timing, and was advised to seek access to the audio of a media conference held by the Commissioner, which you've just heard, and told there was, quote, nothing further to add at this time. Now, I couldn't find any reference to an apology at the media conference. The Commissioner did, however, answer many other questions, including the disciplinary action taken against the officers involved, and said none of them were sacked.
One of the things I didn't provide them was a system where they could make a correct risk assessment. They deal, as you know, and this is not an excuse. We made errors here, and we are standing here, I am standing here admitting those errors. But these humans, what's going through their head at the moment, they are very, very, so hard on themselves. I've had them in tears. I think they are all reflecting on the impact they have had on many families. I think they are good people. They made errors. They work hard. They step forward to support our community. But there is a disciplinary process. They have to be held accountable for making the wrong decision, and they were. There are sanctions in this organisation, but part of our sanctioning model, part of our managerial intervention model, is to educate and train and to make sure we never repeat. They're pretty powerful words we just heard from Ariel, and I support them. I can guarantee you those officers will know exactly how to respond to this in the future.
Now, Liam, I don't know about you, but I couldn't help but reflect back to the reaction of detectives who stuffed up in Amy's case. They didn't appear apologetic at all. In fact, they remained adamant that Amy took her own life, and the force didn't just back this, but agreed wholeheartedly.
Well, as you know, neither Detectives Kirkman nor Weedman ever appeared to be apologetic, and despite all the evidence making it clear that Amy was unable to shoot herself, WA Police continued to support them right up until the 2021 inquest. Only after the inquest did WA Police issue a letter of regret. So that wasn't a formal apology. I mean, some people might think we're splitting straws here, Alison, but a letter of regret to the mother of a dead daughter is not the same as a personal apology, in my opinion. Especially, you'll recall the letter of regret got one of the dates wrong within the letter. So clearly, whoever fact-checked and looked at the typos didn't do it very closely, or didn't really care too much about it. So it was done pretty ad hoc, you've got to say.
Yeah.
So it was all a bit, to me, it was a bit of a bottom covering exercise. But anyway, but again, that was because forensics were called off at the scene in Amy's case. So they didn't have anything else to go on. I mean, in the Bombara case, you've got 2 women who are dead, and no policeman loses their job. Nobody is sacked. No one is sacked. The Commissioner still stands up and says, I stand by my officers. What does that say about the culture in the police force, if you can still do that? We've already acknowledged that it's a very, very difficult job that they're facing, and DV cases are very, very difficult to deal with. But we've also acknowledged, and you have to be blind, Freddie, not to have this sort of shoved in your face, that independent authorities have said they got it wrong, got it wrong, got it wrong, got it wrong. So where is the accountability? I'll say it again, these people are not only, it's not just their job to keep people safe, they are sworn under oath to protect. That is the whole reason, that is their mission statement in life. That is the job of a policeman. Now, if you get the job wrong and you still keep your job, what does that say to the rest of the people in the ranks?
Well, I mean, obviously the way that they handled Amy's case, I mean, that was disgraceful, and they closed ranks.
Okay.
But also remember that Cole Blanche was the name on the letter of regret, who was Deputy Commissioner at the time, and the Police Commissioner presiding over WA Police throughout the investigation into Amy's death prior to the one now being undertaken was Chris Dawson, who is now the Governor of Western Australia. You had some dealings with him, didn't you, Liam?
Yeah, I did. And I think you can see some patterns emerging here that Chris Dawson has passed on well and truly to Cole Blanche. I mean, Cole's learned some valuable lessons, I think, because with Chris Dawson, he's a marvellous political player. And it's really all about the top echelon, the top tiers, the hierarchy of the police force. If you keep in sweet with the government of the day, you will eventually be rewarded. As you've just pointed out, Chris Dawson is now the Governor of Western Australia. So the police and the state government and the people at the top, the Chris Dawsons, the Mark McGowans, had very close relationships. And so they end up getting rewarded. But what happens to the rank and file and what they're doing to the public? How's that culture going, as we discussed? And I mean, we end up having in this state a minister for police. We don't have a minister of police. Now, the police minister has just been changed because of the cabinet lineup reshuffle, as we've discussed at the start of the program. Perhaps, in a blue moon, you might hear the minister come out and criticise the police, or call for change, or call for reform, or something. That's what a minister of the Crown is supposed to do, because they get paid by the taxpayer, not by the rank and file. That's called a police union. But I think Cole Blanche has learned those lessons very well. Not that he didn't know them before he took the top job, because to get to that level in those sort of paramilitary organisations such as a police force, you have to be very conscious of politics. And so I think in that sense he's done a very good job, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the culture of the force is any better.
Well, you'd think he'd also have to protect the reputation and the integrity of WA Police, and I would say at this stage he's not, particularly in relation to Amy's case, not doing a good job at that.
Well, I think the reputation has been, severely dented by a whole stack of failings, litany of failings over the past 15, 20 years, Al. So, I think there's a lot of work to be done on that. But can we just go back to this investigation and the investigation report into the Bombara killings? Because there's one more thing I noticed about it, and it was this last line.
Repeat offenders who cannot demonstrate a change in their behaviour have no place in our community, and police will always recommend to the courts that they remain in prison.
Okay, so let's look at that in context of Amy Wensley's case. Now, her partner at the time of her death, David Simmons, who has a history of violent behaviour, has been imprisoned once for assaulting a police officer, and that officer being Larry Blandford, who was the first on the scene at Amy's death. David Simmons served 9 months for that. Then he was released and charged again for allegedly assaulting another police officer. And every time this matter was due before court, he just decided he wouldn't turn up. They then issue an arrest warrant and then cancel it again when he turns up late and reschedules a new time, so it fits in with David Simmons' lifestyle, in which the same thing happens. I mean, he's just rorting the system, isn't he? Isn't he just gaming the system at taxpayers' expense?
That's been a real concern to me too. So I contacted the WA Justice Department and asked them what measures, if any, would be put in place to ensure he turns up next time, or could constant no-shows just continue indefinitely? This was the reply.
David Simmons appeared in Perth Magistrates Court on 8 January 2025, where the arrest warrant was cancelled. He was granted bail with conditions and a $5,000 personal undertaking and a $3,000 surety. The matter is next listed in Perth Magistrates Court on 15 May at 9:30am for a call-over.
Okay, so as it turns out, the 15th of May is now no longer happening, Al, because surprisingly this was brought forward again after David Simmons ended up at Hakea Prison. Hakea is the remand prison in WA, for breaching bail. So on the 29th of February, via video link from Hakea, Simmons appeared before Magistrate Melita Medcalf. He was represented by defence lawyer Reece Mola, while Sergeant Keys appeared for the police prosecution. Now, we obtained a copy of the transcript of exactly what happened in that case. Have a listen.
Is your name David Robert Simmons? Can you hear us okay, Mr. Simmons?
Yes. May it please the court, Your Honour, I am Mr. Mola. I appear for Mr. Simmons.
All right, Mr. Simmons, I will read the one charge to you that's a previous plea of not guilty on May 13. The allegation is on March 8, 2024 in Northbridge. You obstructed a police auxiliary officer in the performance of that officer's function. Do you understand the charge?
Yes.
Okay. How do you wish to plead?
Guilty.
Thank you. And on that basis then, Sergeant, I understand that the assault public officer 14189 will be dismissed?
Yes, Your Honour.
All right, so an order will be made to dismiss that charge pursuant to Section 25, and I will hear the facts.
Thank you, Your Honour. At 7:10pm on the 8th of March 2024, the accused is conveyed by police to the Perth Watch House. Whilst there, the accused was physically restrained by police auxiliary officers against the wall as he is abusive, resisting and made threats towards one of them. The accused was then brought to a padded cell due to his previous behaviour. He was then informed by the KOs that under Section 135 of the CIA, the strip search would be conducted. However, he refused to. As a result, reasonable force is used to conduct the search. The KO sustained cuts and abrasions to his arm during the incident. That's the facts, Your Honour.
Thank you.
Does Your Honour need to hear the facts in relation to the disorderly?
Yes, I do. Sorry.
At 5:31 on the 8th of March 2024, the accused was at in Armidale. Police located the address in relation to an incident that had happened between the accused and other occupants of the house. The accused is deemed to be heavily intoxicated upon police arrival, and whilst police were speaking to the other people at the scene, the accused started to shout and be abusive towards those people, despite police asking him to lower his voice and behave himself multiple times. During the incident, multiple people from the neighbourhood were out on the street and the incident was captured on police body-worn camera. That's the facts, Your Honour.
Thank you.
Your Honour, having regard to the seriousness of the offending and the matters of mitigation I will soon address, Mr. Simmons' pleas remain indicative of an acceptance of responsibility and a willingness to facilitate the course of justice. The facts are accepted by Mr. Simmons and he accepts his behaviour and resistance was unnecessary and simply inexcusable.
Here Mr. Mola goes into Simmons' background, how he was a talented sportsman at school, but left at 15, worked with his father as a machine operator in the mines, then later a shearer, and finally suffered head trauma and lost his spleen in a motorbike accident in his early 20s. Then he turns to the death of Amy Wensley.
Mr. Simmons' long-term partner was found dead at their home in 2014 with a fatal head wound from a shotgun round. After 3 separate police investigations, Mr. Simmons was cleared of any involvement in his partner's death, and he also gave evidence in what was a fairly harrowing coronial inquiry in 2021. and in my ultimate submission, he has never been the same since. I'm told by his father that his family has facilitated some counselling for him, but perhaps those circumstances shed light on his background. And in terms of the timing of the current offending, it was at the same time when Mr. Simmons' partner's death was being reinvestigated in the Channel 7 News podcast, The Truth About Amy. And as part of that investigation, he had been tracked down by an investigative journalist, and that is what I'm told was the catalyst for the escalation in his alcohol consumption and agitation at the time of offending. So put simply, I think he has struggled to cope with the emotion and trauma, the public attention and the false claims that were being spread.
All right, Mr. Simmons, in relation to these matters, the reason I just asked about what you've done to address both the alcoholism and the underlying PTSD diagnosis was to see whether it would be appropriate for my court to deal with the matter by way of a community-based order today so that you could get those adequate supports. It seems to me, though, that you've got family in the background that are willing to assist you to ensure that you follow through with that support. And hopefully, Mr. Simmons, you do so, because the background that Mr. Moeller has just outlined to me is nothing short of tragic. And I have no doubt that that's had a huge impact on your life. It's evident, Mr. Simmons, on your face today that there is remorse there. It's appropriate, in my view, to deal with it by way of a fine. It will be a fine of $1,000. That has been reduced, taking into account the fact that Mr. Simmons has been in custody for 1 month. All right, Mr. Simmons, you take care and go and get the help that you need, because it's obvious to me that that still remains unaddressed.
Thank you, Your Honour.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Moeller.
Now, I don't know about you, Liam, but the thing that jumped out at me is that David Simmons is yet again able to say exactly what he wants and remain unchallenged.
Well, I don't know where I start on this. I mean, I'm absolutely fascinated by this, but I can tell you what, Alison, here's my immediate reaction. And it doesn't take a Rhodes Scholar to figure this out. Somebody needs to get in contact with Magistrate Metcalf and bring it to her attention, because I'm not suggesting that she knows about this or was aware about this for one moment. But if she does know about it, I'd love to know what she thinks about it, because as you know, and all our listeners would know, in a courtroom, it's all about honesty, right? You have to be honest under the law. It's the first tenet. So the stuff that goes on and is given to a magistrate, the information, the evidence that's given to a magistrate, in this case, in mitigation from his lawyer, from David Simmons' lawyer, has to be an honest representation of what's happened. Now, let me point out exactly what's gone on here. Reece Moeller, and I'm just going to go back to the transcript of what happened when he got up to tell the magistrate that David Simmons should not be punished very severely for this at all, right? Let me just find this for a second. Hang on. Mm-hmm. Before I get to the key stroke here, he also says, as our listeners have heard, he makes this comment. He says, Mr. Simmons' pleas remain indicative of an acceptance of responsibility. An acceptance of responsibility. So let's be completely transparent about this. A plea deal has been done, and I'm very surprised that the police prosecutor agreed to this. A plea deal has been done. So there's 2 charges initially. There's a charge of assaulting a public officer, and there's a charge of obstructing a public officer. And David Simmons has agreed to plead guilty to obstructing a public officer, a plea that, incidentally, he pleaded not guilty to when he first appeared, so he's changed his plea, in return for the more serious charge of assaulting a public officer being dropped. And this is a bloke, just remind us again, this is a bloke who has already been imprisoned previously for the same charge, assaulting a public officer. That charge has been dropped in order for him to plead guilty on the other one. Now, in mitigation, he goes on, Mr. Moeller, on behalf of his client, he goes on to tell Magistrate Metcalf about how David Simmons is in a whole world of hurt because he's emotionally in turmoil, Alison. It's incredible. I mean, he's really struggling here. And he says this, and I'm quoting from the transcript. Mr. Moeller says, and in terms of the timing of the current offending, so that's obstructing the public officer, Mr. Moeller tells the magistrate, quote, it was at a time when Mr. Simmons' partner's death, that's Amy, was being reinvestigated in the Channel 7 news podcast, The Truth About Amy. And as part of that investigation, he had been tracked down by an investigative journalist, he means me, and that is what I'm told was the catalyst for the escalation in his alcohol consumption and agitation at the time of this offending. Let me repeat that, at the time of this offending. So put simply, says Mr. Moeller to the magistrate, I think he struggled to cope with the emotion and trauma, the public attention and the false claims that were being spread. That's our claims, Alison.
Yeah.
So this is pretty serious stuff.
Yeah.
So all that emotional turmoil and all the pressure we put on him all led him to obstructing a public officer and being, as they said, very deeply intoxicated. Okay? Only one problem, Mr. Moeller, with this argument.
Yes, big problem.
We began work on this investigation on the ground in Western Australia and the podcast on the 6th of May 2024, almost exactly 3 months after David Simmons was drunk as a skunk and running around obstructing police officers in the course of their duty. We first met David Simmons a week after that on the 13th of May. That's when David Simmons first found out that we were investigating, over 3 months after the offence. And that was at the, surprise, surprise, the Perth Central Law Courts, in which David Simmons was very happy to have a conversation, and it went something like this, F off. That was the end of the conversation.
That's the polite part.
That's the polite part. Yes, exactly. That's the only thing we can say with a G-rated podcast. So can I just come back to the point here? I would say to the court, you've got a real problem because you have been entirely misled. Now, this wasn't challenged by the magistrate because the magistrate understandably would have thought, Magistrate Metcalf would have thought, okay, well, I'm being told by Reece Moeller, he's an associate at Tehan Legal Group, the Tehan Legal Group. Prior to that, he was a senior federal prosecutor at the Commonwealth DPP office. So I'm just completely flabbergasted by all this.
Well, that's the thing, right? I mean, Moeller should have done checks, of course. I mean, I would.
So I sent him an email to find out if he would seek to correct the record, and he replied, Dear Alison, unfortunately I have not acted for Mr. Simmons since the conclusion of those proceedings. Any submissions were made in accordance with the instructions given to me. In these circumstances, I won't be providing any official comment on the matter. Any queries should be directed to Mr. Simmons. Well, that's easier said than done. Anyway, moving on. Apologies for being unable to assist with your inquiries. I hope you have a great long weekend. Kind regards, Reece Moeller.
I mean, Simmons time and time again, when are people going to wake up? He gets treated as an endangered species, and it's about time it stopped. And if he's going to be in court, it needs to be honest.
Now then you have Sergeant Keys, right? The police prosecutor. It would have been really easy for him to come back and say, actually, hang on, like if he'd had any inclination or anything.
You raise a great point. There was no challenge to this whatsoever. No challenge to this whatsoever. And that's from the police prosecutor. Now, coming back to, the commissioner representing his troops and giving them, albeit, I think, false confidence. Where is the role of the prosecutor in this? You're spot on, Al. It's a great point to bring up. Why aren't they jumping up? I mean, if you really want to defend your troops at ground level, obstructing and assaulting in the course of your duty is bread and butter stuff, isn't it? Why isn't he jumping up in court and challenging things? Yeah. You see, the prosecutor's already made an agreement. This is part of the plea deal. I can't believe that. And nowhere does the prosecutor remind the magistrate, in actual fact, Your Honour, this is his second conviction along these lines. He was previously convicted of assaulting a police officer.
But the other thing is, I mean, as the magistrate said in her response, all of a sudden, full sympathy for David Simmons because none of this was challenged. No one, I mean, I suppose as a magistrate you'd expect somebody would challenge this if there was inaccuracies, but it wasn't. Just like police opposed a bench warrant to arrest him when he didn't turn up for Amy's inquest hearing. It's just like, what is going on here with WA Police? I mean, not to mention all the stuff we're going to cover off in this second season where it's really, really concerning. Watch this space. But in the meantime, we have purposely laid low for a bit so WA Police has time to continue its reignited investigation into Amy's death in preparation of an updated brief for the state's Director of Public Prosecution, Rob Owen.
Once this investigation is complete, WA Police will present all findings of the task force to the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions for his consideration.
That's what WA Police told us in a statement late last year. We then contacted the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions and were told this.
The ODPP and investigative agencies have an independent function within the criminal justice system, and it is a matter for the investigative agency as to whether they accept that advice and decide whether to lay charges or not.
So, Al, they seem to be saying that it's still up to WA Police as to whether charges are laid, if any. Now, if they are, the director then decides whether the case is strong enough to prosecute.
It is proper to publicly explain the ODPP's approach to the question of whether a prosecution is to continue or be terminated. For example, by reference to the lack of a prima facie case, lack of reasonable prospects of conviction, or that there is no public interest in proceeding.
So in other words, whether they think there's enough evidence to secure a conviction should Amy's case proceed to trial. And that's what we'll be discussing in Season 2, Al. We've already established that Amy could not have shot herself, but are the circumstances of Amy having been killed by another person, by a third party, enough for her case to go to trial?
Over the course of this season, we'll be revealing yet more evidence proving Amy couldn't have killed herself. I mean, if there wasn't enough, but also the way the evidence has been weighted so far. And there are clear issues with that, which we will talk to some high calibre people of integrity who will provide their opinions on it. And we'll also speak to those who thought right from the beginning Amy's death or supposed suicide didn't make sense, but were sidelined by others who were committed to the suicide theory being pushed through no matter what. We will also evaluate the case for the prosecution and what it means should the DPP and WA Police decide not to pursue a conviction.
Yes, bucking the system. What happened to the detective who stuck her neck out and refused to agree that Amy's death was a suicide?
I identified what outstanding lines of inquiry should be followed. For instance, a forensic. So I started looking at that. And then I asked Major Crime for a memo giving their critical decisions on how they deemed it non-suspicious.
And new evidence putting the integrity and the reputation of WA Police under further threat.
She recalls him being so angry with her and standing so close that she could feel spit on her face.
Al, great to be back.
Oh, absolutely, Liam. We've got a big job ahead of us, and trust me, there's a long way to go here. And I tell you, we are not giving up on this. We have an investigation into a woman's death who did not shoot herself. The evidence is overwhelming. But then we also have a person of interest who had means, motive, and opportunity. So hang on to your hats. We have a lot coming up. You won't want to miss it.
If you knew Amy and have information about her death, we'd love to hear from you. Just email us at thetruthaboutamy@7.com.au. Or visit our website 7news.com.au/thetruthaboutamy. You can also send us an anonymous tip at www.thetruthaboutamy.com. Presenter and executive producer, Alison Sandy. Presenter and investigative journalist, Liam Bartlett. Sound design, Mark Wright. Assistant producer, Cassie Woodward. Vodcast editor, Carmen Bensley. graphic artist Jason Blandford. And special thanks to Brian Seymour and Jessica Evanson. This is a 7 News production.